first, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Thank you so much for joining me now on this weather segment of Fox 12 Now. I am joined with Dr. Kyra Bobinet, who is going to be talking with us for Women's Health Month and specifically about seasonal affective disorder. So, Dr. Kyra, thank you so much for joining us today and just honing in on me with this topic that actually comes up with me a lot when I do talk with our viewers out in the public about our weather and our weather patterns here and how it impacts them. So, for those that don't know what seasonal affective disorder or SAD is, can you give us, kind of an idea or a definition of what that is?
Yeah, so it is a type of depression, a subtype of depression that is diagnosed after 2 years of a pattern related to the weather, related to lower light cycles in your life, causing a kind of a joylessness, which is kind of the main criteria that is used to diagnose this problem. But it could be a number of other things. It could be sleep disturbances, appetite issues, other mood and stress kind of issues. But the hallmark is that it very much has an association with the light-dark cycles of our seasons and tends to go away as the days get longer in the spring and summer.
Does that differ any from what we call the winter blues?
No, I think the winter blues is actually the folksy observation before, seasonal affective disorder came in. I mean, same thing with baby blues used to be the common term for postpartum depression.
So why are women more likely to, experience SAD? Is there anything biological or hormonal that is a factor?
Yeah, so basically women have estrogen cycles that kind of go up and down through the month and across their life, and even into menopause, are wonky, And what that does is it changes the melatonin production of our body. The melatonin is kind of the hormone that we secrete more and more as we get to dusk and dark in the day. And if we don't have enough of it, then we don't sleep well, and we have all kinds of other biological issues which we can get into. And so estrogen is the regulator of the melatonin release. And so women have this kind of awkward, up and down kind of melatonin release depending on their cycle, depending on the season. And of course, we then are more sensitive to depression and, appetite surges and disruption of sleep for that reason.
Can this impact anything in a woman's health other than just their mood, like their physical health, their sleep, anything like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, everything in the body is interconnected, and specifically, estrogen driving melatonin, melatonin driving sleep, also metabolism, REM sleep, circadian rhythms. So, the light-dark cycles shrinking as they do changes our relationship to light-dark, and we have lower energy, more fatigue, those kinds of side effects as well. And just to generally a lack of motivation. And this is coming from an area in the brain that is recently discovered called the habenula. And this turns out to be the master control switch for everything we do and don't do behaviorally, and everything we feel in terms of our mood side, our mental health. And so as the melatonin goes up and down or starts to wane in these darker times of the year, then this part of our brain activates and it suppresses our motivation to do anything in our lives that we want to do, And I think in ancient times we had societies which would, tell stories and spend time together cooking food in the winter. Nowadays we have jobs that don't have any difference in the winter on their demand on us than in the summer, right? So we have less energy to do the same job for about half the year.
Earlier you mentioned menopause, so I'm wondering if there are any, points in a woman's life, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, menopause, all those things that make us more susceptible during those periods in our life.
Yeah, so the female body in general is more sensitive than the male body to light-dark cycles anyway, and also to temperature drops and extreme temperatures. And that's because our bodies were designed to carry babies, and so we couldn't be reckless with our safety around temperature or our environment. So what happens is that, the melatonin that I talked about, that that goes down over the time of life, but also during pregnancy, it goes up. We have a lot of melatonin. So, I guess it helps us to sleep, even though as pregnant women, you can have a lot of pain and suffering, in your sleep, trying to get comfortable. And then the postpartum is a big drop because the placenta has learned to excrete a lot of melatonin that the baby needs. And when the placenta leaves the body, then basically there's this huge dip that we're not used to in melatonin, and that can set us up for the same exact mechanism of the habenula going off and controlling our mood and causing depression feelings.
What role does light and vitamin D play in managing SAD?
So the vitamin D story is mixed. Right now in this moment in scientific and medical knowledge, vitamin D is not thought to be curative of SAD, but there's still a lot of researchers on both sides of that fence. So I would say it's inconclusive right now, but in the past has had different outcomes. The light therapy, though, I think everyone agrees, if you get a 10,000 lux light and you expose yourself usually before 8 a.m. or in the morning time, because you're trying to get that cortisol that responds to light, which is, a stress hormone, but it also is like a vigor hormone, right? So it gets us to go. And then the latter part of the day then will rise in melatonin. And people take melatonin in the evenings too, which I think would be really helpful for a good quality of melatonin that has a lot of evidence behind it, that it's absorbed, not just the junk that you kind of see here and there, and you haven't done your research.
If somebody's trying to manage all of this naturally, are there any proven habits or things that they can do to help out?
Yeah, so one of the things that's recently been shown with respect to this new area, the habenula that controls everything, is that when we doom scroll at night, or when we have problematic internet use is what it's called. It's like digital addiction, right? So when we get caught up in those things, whether it's like I'm shopping for some, shoes that I need to go running in, right? And what if I don't find them, right? And so the brain processes that as a failure in the failure scoreboard. And anytime it does that, the habenula wakes up, and then it suppresses our motivation. We feel depressed. We feel, this is the controller of depression. So we want to keep that nice and quiet by not engaging in these digital activities. So in the latter half of the day, if you can, and certainly close to bedtime.
That is really interesting. Thank you for that one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how can someone tell if they're having the seasonal affective disorder or if it's another form of depression or anxiety? How can they differentiate between the two?
Yeah, I think that, we have a very big surge of self-awareness on depression and depressive symptoms. That, again, the main hallmark from a diagnostic perspective is that you cannot find joy. So if that's the case, most typically what's happening in your brain is that your habenula is on, and you got to figure out a way to turn it off, or to get medication to support that, get therapy to support that kind of thing, because it's basically a symptom, the sadness. With seasonal affective disorder, what we know is that hunger and kind of, those kinds of symptoms, sleep disturbances, happen before depressive feelings and loss of joy. So that might be something that if you find, I have this where, it gets colder and I start eating, and so, I wouldn't say I have seasonal affective disorder, but I also have, I probably could benefit from some light therapy. I deliberately go outside to get light, in my closed eyes, not open eyes, whenever I can.
That's another interesting answer. Thank you. What advice would you give to someone who's maybe feeling ashamed or hesitant to try and seek professional help when they might need it?
Yeah, this is my biggest mission in life. You are not a failure because you have this part of your brain activated. So what? We should stop the blame game with ourselves and just say, hey, the fact that I don't have motivation is just a symptom of this area of my brain being triggered. Maybe I didn't see what in my environment or in my social world triggered me to feel like a failure or to make me feel bad about myself, but here I am, and it's not my fault. It is just like if you had a little pain in your neck or whatever, you would seek help for it. And so, going to more of a therapeutic area and just skipping the whole self-blame and feeling like a failure thing. I hope I can convince everybody that there's no way that you are a failure. There's no way to fail at this. You're just responding to your body.
And that feeling that you're talking about of failure, is that, I mean, is it more common in women or men, or is it just more of a personality dependent thing?
Yeah, women tend to be, again, as more social beings, as more caretaking of the next generation beings, tend to be more hypersensitive to signs that they are not adequate, that they're not failing. And so we're more susceptible to what's called negativity bias, which is like our self-talk, which is also driven off the habenula. It's driving our self-talk more and more and more. And it's kind of one of those things where once you get going, your brain kind of has the habit of doing that to you. And so breaking up with negative self-talk, calling it into question, having some other distraction, anything, that go for a walk, do anything, talk to somebody, whatever you can do to just not allow your brain to spin. Because the more it does that, the more it changes your brain to do that more. So you're doing it more because you're doing it more, if that makes sense.
So is this one of those things where, maybe having some positive, things in your life to say to yourself and to kind of like try and bring you out of that, naturally? Or is there anything like that that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's really hard because when somebody's really in the depths of depression, you don't want to do anything. You don't want to reach out, so to say, reach out, don't be so isolating. Like that's the exact opposite. So I think that the at-home treatment is something like, hey, I am not a bad person. I did not fail at this. The fact that I feel bad is the same as if I had a painful ankle or something like that, an injury, and I'm going to go seek help for that reason. And maybe there's a part of you that will respond to, if you stop blaming yourself and you just say, hey, this is just like any other illness, this is like any other symptom, I'm going to go find help. And that way, SSRIs, antidepressant medications, they help create a floor of how you feel, so you don't have the capability of going too much lower, so that's supportive for people while they figure out, how to solution this long term, enough time to get a light therapy going, those kinds of things. And the light therapy should be working within, a couple weeks, and as well as the antidepressants. So it's not that long of a wait, even though it can be excruciating for some people.
Besides the at-home treatment, are there any other, new treatments or research or anything that's out there that you want people to know about or that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I think that we're at the verge of, first we learned about how powerful this part of our brain is. And now we're finding all of the connections, like the self-talk just came out last week, like these connections. And now we're going to take it seriously. And now we're going to be creative and say, okay, how can I neutralize my failure so that I don't overlook the fact that not finding those running shoes at night scrolling is turning on my habenula, and I don't have motivation to live my life the next morning, but I didn't know what happened. So it's starting to track ourselves and create a dialogue with each other around, well, you're not bad, your habenula's on. Because when I lose motivation at home, me and my husband talk about this all the time. Like, I got a habenula hit, and I'm like, where did that happen? Oh yeah, it was that article I read like over my lunch break, and I felt hopeless, or I felt, my motivation just tanked after that. So that kind of stuff I think is emerging in the human family and kind of health and wellness in general. I think it'll eventually be common speak that we kind of code to each other, but right now it's kind of new.
One last question for you. As if somebody knows that they have a tendency or they've suffered from SAD before, going into, coming out of the summer, going into the fall, knowing what's coming here, especially, in the Pacific Northwest, are there things that people can do in advance to prepare themselves so maybe they don't even have to deal with that negativity? They can kind of, pre-medicate. Like I talked with an allergenist and she said, you got to stay on the medication, hit it early before it sets in. Is there anything like that women can do, or even men heading into the darker months?
Yeah, what I would say is, in my research on thousands of people, the people who get the behavior change out of themselves that is sustainable, they all have one thing in common, which is having an iterative mindset. What does that mean? It means that they're practicing something and then they're iterating or tweaking and tinkering with it until it works for them. And then they might get tired of that. Then they iterate again. So that constant iteration, when it is right to keep yourself going, right, is the thing to do. So for somebody, it might be, I'm going to exercise more, so I'm going to take melatonin. Somebody else might say, I'm going to do light therapy. Like all of those things are iterations, and you can combine them and you can sequence them and things like that. So what I would say is that there's not any, aside from light therapy, kind of catching the earliest appetite increases. It's really up to the person to kind of say what might work for my body, because we're different genders, we're different ages, and we have different lifestyles.
Thank you so much again for joining me and talking about this. I know a lot of our viewers are interested in this topic and just wanting to take an opportunity to kind of dive a little deeper. I don't get to talk about these sort of things on a regular news broadcast, so I'm taking opportunities to meet with specialists and talk about the things that we want to go into a little more deep and put it on our Fox 12 Now digital station. So thank you again for joining us today.
I think it's going to help a lot of people.
I hope so. We appreciate you spending time with us today.